After the Heisei Gamera trilogy wrapped up in 1999, the series went dormant. Daiei collapsed, Kadokawa bought the library in 2002, and Gamera became a property that someone could actually do something with again. Kadokawa floated a Godzilla crossover with Toho, but Toho shut it down, and the company pivoted to a solo revival timed to the character's 40th anniversary. The target date slid around before settling on 2006. Early on, Kadokawa decided this movie would not follow Shusuke Kaneko's continuity or tone. The goal was a softer, kid-facing Gamera, closer to how the character functioned in the Showa years. An unused concept from the early days of Guardian of the Universe by Chiaki and Kazuya Konaka helped lock that in. A boy finds a baby turtle that grows into Gamera. The production leaned fully into that idea and redesigned Gamera to look smaller and younger, which immediately tells you what kind of movie this is. Yukari Tatsui came in to write the script from a TV drama background, and Ryuta Tasaki was brought on to direct. Tasaki had years of tokusatsu experience from Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, which lined up cleanly with the intended audience. He opens the film with a prologue that treats Gamera as a known protector, skipping the human versus monster tension that defined the 90s trilogy. The story stays tight on Toru, a kid dealing with loss, and Toto, the creature he raises. Ryo Tomioka plays Toru, and the 2005 shoot was structured around working with child actors. Early Toto scenes used a real African spurred tortoise, which came with very strict limits on lighting, temperature, and handling. Isao Kaneko led the effects team, with suit and creature work handled by long-term genre veterans including Tomo Haraguchi, who built the Heisei-era Gamera suits. The film mixes live animals, suits, miniatures, animatronics, and even CGI to sell Toto's growth. It was the first Gamera movie shot on digital HD, which made compositing and effects work easier across the board. Location shooting covered Mai Prefecture for the coastal town and Nagoya for the climax, with heavy reliance on local extras. Kadokawa pushed hard on marketing for the anniversary, flooding the release with events, merchandise, and advanced ticket campaigns aimed squarely at kids and parents. The movie opened in April of 2006 and stalled at roughly 410 million yen in Japan, which quietly killed any sequel plans. Reactions were split. Younger audiences connected with Toto and the tone of the film, but longtime fans, especially those of the Kaneko trilogy, weren't too big on this. Gamera the Brave did not restart the franchise, and it kind of failed as a result. It was the last Gamera live-action film for, well, a long time. In fact, with the release of this video, there hasn't been a live-action Gamera movie released since this. 20 years after the fact. Now, for me personally, I was 6 or 7 when I really fell into the Godzilla and Kaiju rabbit hole in depth. This was years before the Monsterverse, back when big-budget Kaiju movies weren't really a thing at this point. But Cloverfield had just dropped, and the newest Japanese Kaiju film on the table was Gamera the Brave. Because of that, it hung around conventions and fan spaces way longer than you would expect. I swear it played every single year at G-Fest for like a decade straight. As a result, I kind of love this movie. I know, it's flawed, it has a lot of problems, but there's something about it that just represents like a time capsule of this specific era of Kaiju fandom. So, does it hold up? Let's find out. This is Gamera the Brave. In 1973, Gamera sacrifices himself to save a small town from the Gaios, an event witnessed by a young boy named Kosuke. Decades later, his son, Toru, discovers an egg that hatches into a strange turtle who he names Toto. As Toto rapidly grows, Toru forms a deep bond with him while struggling with grief over his mother's death. When the man-eating monster Zetus attacks, Toto reveals himself as Gamera Reborn. With help from Toru and the other children, Toto regains his power, defeats Zetus, and flies away, leaving Toru changed by loss and acceptance.
So long. Gamera.
Gamera the Brave knows exactly where it's pulling from, as this looks, sounds, and feels like a love letter to the Showa era of Gamera. Which, depending on your taste, can be a very, very bad thing and a massive misstep from the highest highs this franchise had just hit. I mean, why would you willingly go back to the quote-unquote worst era of Gamera as opposed to continuing from where you left off? In my opinion, though, I think this move is kind of genius, as it tries to modernize kids' movies from the 60s and 70s for a modern audience. You can 100% see this movie being made back then, but it weirdly works and never feels outdated. There's sort of this mindset with remakes where people are often scared to remake a movie that was bad. They remade Ben-Hur. Why? To me, I think the point of a remake should be remake something that deserves to be remade, where you can do something fresh and new with it. And Gamera the Brave does that.
Toto, I'll see you again.
The whole time when I was watching all the Showa Gamera movies, all I could think was, this is flawed and outdated now, but a remake could be killer, especially if you aim it more towards children. And Gamera the Brave does just that. And it does it pretty damn well. Right off the bat, the movie locks onto a kid's perspective, and it treats Gamera as a protector that you're supposed to trust, which lines up cleanly with how the character worked in the late Showa years, and almost feels like a course correction from Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris. Gamera feels closer to a storybook guardian than a walking disaster, and his actions are easy to read on an emotional level. In a way, I'm almost torn as I found myself adoring this take on Gamera. It almost makes me think that the Kaneko trilogy went too dark, and that the critics at the time were correct in bashing that last installment for that reason. On the surface, it kind of reminds me of how Zack Snyder took Superman in a much darker direction with his movies, only for James Gunn to bring it back to a more lighthearted, family-friendly tone. Of course, Shusuke Kaneko is a much more competent filmmaker than Zack Snyder by a long shot. Regardless, Gamera the Brave does a phenomenal job of giving scenes room to pause on reactions and quiet beats instead of sprinting from one destruction sequence to the next. It also carries over some basic discipline from the Heisei trilogy. The plotting stays clean, cause and effect are easy to follow, and the story never loses focus by spinning off into unrelated threads. Everything keeps circling back to one relationship, and that would be Toru and Toto. The human story carries the entire movie, and that's why people tend to either completely love it or completely hate it with little to no middle ground. I land firmly on the side that says it works pretty well. The film commits to Toru and Toto and never acts embarrassed about that choice. It's earnest. Quiet scenes are allowed to play out, which gives the story a very clear emotional spine.
I'm stuck with you now.
Ryo Tomioka does a lot of heavy lifting as Toru. He never feels like a kid actor mugging for sympathy or cuteness. His performance feels grounded, curious, and sincere, which makes the bond with Toto feel believable. I don't know, I think he's doing a pretty damn good job considering that most of the time he's interacting with either a puppet or a real turtle. It's like, cut him some slack here. He's doing a pretty good job.
I don't want to lose someone I love so much.
By the time the movie asks you to care about real stakes, you already do, because the relationship has been doing the work the whole time. The kaiju action is handled with restraint that fits the budget. Citywide destruction stays limited, and the camera sticks close to the suits where they look their best. Toto's design pulls from the Showa look, but reshapes it around the idea of a young, inexperienced creature. He moves quicker, reacts more, and comes across as vulnerable in a way that really fits the story well. He is not one of the franchise's most intimidating designs, but he is distinct and genuinely charming. Might be one of my favorite Gamera designs. This has grown on me a lot. Zetas immediately cuts through as a threat. The sharp silhouette and the retractable multicolored frill gives it a strong visual identity right away that kind of reminds me of Jiris from Ultraman. The design here feels very hostile and aggressive. Zetas looks built for combat, and the fight scenes keep the action readable without losing the sense of chaos that kaiju movies live on. And the design is very unique too, which is something that the Gamera franchise has always excelled at without fail. Even if a monster looks ridiculous and not even remotely intimidating, you could still count on the filmmakers designing an unforgettable kaiju that stands the test of time. Now, let's be fully transparent here. I am very much aware of the effect nostalgia has on me with this flick, and how it colors how I see this movie. I'm not hiding that. Even with the attachment, the weak spots are very obvious on a rewatch. If you don't have history with it, the film can feel flat. The story hits familiar beats and rarely pushes past them. It sits well below the top tier of Gamera movies and doesn't even clear the bar as the strongest kid-focused entry. Still, it improves on much of the Showa run in terms of execution and intent, but that only goes so far once the emotional connection fades. Looking back, the movie ends up feeling like a closing chapter as opposed to a fresh start for a new franchise. Its attempt to steer Gamera back towards his earlier image as a benevolent guardian reminds me of, again going back to Superman Returns, another project that was driven by a desire to reconnect an aging icon with its past. In both cases, the reverence is very clear, but the result struggles to be even remotely memorable. Superman eventually got another swing a few years later, but Gamera never did. Outside of a Netflix series and appearances in video games like Gigabash, the character has been absent from theaters ever since, and the character has been largely irrelevant in the cultural zeitgeist. For fans, that absence gives Gamera the Brave a slightly melancholic aftertaste with it. As of right now, it's the end of the franchise, and in a way, the film that killed Gamera. With all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick. You are watching Firewood Media. This is just one small part of my Gamera retrospective series. Up next, we've got one more installment on the way. It's Gamera Rebirth, the Netflix anime series. And that should wrap up this run of videos. Massive shout out to channel members. Your names are listed right up here on screen. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.